Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome. So glad you're here, especially with the rain. We're really pleased to have Nancy Glass and Amy Senior with the Department of Justice here to give us our presentation tonight. And thank you so very much for being here. The presentation is being sponsored by both PROUD, which is People Reaching Out for Unity University, and the Ferguson Neighborhood Policing Steering Committee. I think everyone here knows pretty much about each organization, so I will just say we have literature in the back, and of course we have lots of members here who can tell you more about what all we're doing. I think I will leave it at that, so that we're starting kind of late as it is. So again, thank you so much for being here, and to proceed.
So people know.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. And then what we thought, because especially we've got quite a few people on Zoom and here, that the easiest way to handle questions after the presentation, we have a set of note cards in the back and some pens. And if you could just write your questions and then provide them to Becky, and then we will Becky or Erica, and then we will announce that we'll deliver them afterwards. So, thank you.
And just one piece of housekeeping for our everyone on Zoom, if you wouldn't mind muting yourselves, I can hear there's a little bit of feedback. That might help with audio. Thanks.
Yeah, Michelle, can you mute everybody?
Well, just except us though, because then they won't be able to hear.
Except for them.
Yeah.
Ready?
All right.
Are we ready? Okay, I think so. All right, Mr. Miller, thank you so much. And thank you so much to the NPSC and PROUD for having us here tonight. We love coming to Ferguson, and it's just such a pleasure to be with all of you. As Mr. Miller said, my name is Amy Senior, and I'm here with Nancy Glass. We are both attorneys with the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division who work on the Ferguson matter. I've been on it since the decree was entered over 8 years ago, and recognize many of you from that time. So just a little overview of what we do. I coach you? Not a PowerPoint wizard myself, but just a little overview of what we hope to cover tonight. We want to start with a little bit about who we are, kind of where we're situated in the DOJ, how we got here, because we see some new faces who may not know kind of like why we're here, what a decree is. We'll do that really briefly because we know that some of you are well aware. Where the decree in Ferguson is now, so kind of a status update on where things stand now. We're going to talk a little bit about other consent decrees around the country because that was a specific request. So we'll talk a little bit, give you a little bit of background there. And then we'll wrap up circling back with the Ferguson consent decree, kind of the successes to date, the challenges to date, and what we see as the path forward. So that's kind of our roadmap for tonight. Thank you. Let me just start with a little bit because I think a lot of times you hear DOJ, and I just wanted to put us in context. So Nancy and I both work for an office called the Special Litigation Section, which sits within the Civil Rights Division within the overall Department of Justice. DOJ, right, it's a huge agency, covers criminal matters and tax and civil matters and all kinds of things. And then within DOJ, there's a smaller division called the Civil Rights Division. We work on all kinds of things like housing, employment, disability rights. And our section within the Civil Rights Division is called the Special Litigation Section. And we work, one of the areas that we work on is law enforcement misconduct. And specifically, we enforce a civil statute that makes it unlawful for any government authority to engage in a pattern or practice of conduct by law enforcement officers that deprives people of their rights under the Constitution. And we wanted to emphasize this tonight just to remind people that our investigation and our work is focused on FPD in the city as a whole, right? Our investigation was not about any single officer. It was a civil investigation looking at pattern and practice as a whole. So just wanted to reorient you onto that. And Nancy's going to talk a little bit about how we got here.
So most of you in this room were here before, well before we were, and are well aware of how we got here, but just for the sake of, again, giving some context for where we are today, we thought it'd be helpful to briefly go over the timeline, which was we opened our investigation into whether the city of Ferguson and the Ferguson Police Department had engaged in a pattern or practice of civil rights violations in September of 2014. We issued our reports from that investigation the following March. And then just over a year later, in 2016, we entered into a consent decree, which of course, as you all know, is that court-ordered agreement between the DOJ and the city about all the things that the city is going to do to remedy the violations that we identified in our report. Very briefly, what we found in our investigation, we found that the city used police enforcement and the municipal courts to generate income for the city. This was an finding that got a lot of attention. It was unique for our civil rights investigations, and it was well supported in our findings for what we found that the city was doing for what it was motivating its enforcement efforts. That approach to law enforcement meant that the city was also engaging in discrimination against Black people. And we also found that as a result, the city was less effective in its public safety efforts, and that its discriminatory approach to policing had undermined public confidence in the police department. And as a result, it was a less effective department. So, it's very common in one of the issues that we do tend to look into in our investigations is whether police departments are discriminating. But as I mentioned, this was a unique finding about the circumstances here in Ferguson. It had to do with how the court fines and fees that the city was using and it's generating through its enforcement were being used and had such a harmful impact, particularly on Black people here in Ferguson. So part of our assignment, as we understood it today from Proud and the NPSC, was to try to give information to community members about where the status of the consent decree today in 2024. This one slide, we're not really setting out to give you a comprehensive overview of the status of Ferguson's compliance with every single paragraph in the consent decree. Be more just, if you have specific questions about areas, we can try to answer those, but we more just wanted to give you an overview on where things stand. We know that there's a real thirst for knowledge. This is a very involved community. People want to know where the city is and what efforts have been made and what progress has been made and where there needs to be more progress. And so a major accomplishment of the city in coming into compliance with the consent decree is that for the most part, there are some outliers, but for the most part, the policies required by the consent decree are in place, which means, as many of you have participated in this, but the process involves the city, the police department, writing a draft policy, getting input from the monitor, from DOJ, putting it out into the community for feedback, benefiting very much from the substantive feedback we get from community members. Then the city takes that back and makes changes to the policy based on the feedback they've gotten. And through that process, we end up getting a policy that's approved by the monitor. The next step is for the city to, or the police department to do a roll call training, just a short sort of information training about, to let officers know, here's what the policy is. Now you're going to be responsible for it. We're going to get to questions. Sure, absolutely. I can try. I get excited and then I talk quickly. So another accomplishment of the city is that there are, the force and accountability data systems are up and running. This is really significant because before the consent decree, those systems for reporting and investigating force, for taking in citizen complaints were not digitized. They were done just on paper, which makes review a lot more difficult. So the hope, now that those systems are up and are working, is that that will make review by the monitor of the job that the FPD is doing will be more conducive to that and to data analysis as a whole about how FPD is policing. As many of you know, because you participated in these, there are mechanisms now for incorporating community feedback and input into how FPD polices. These are through structures like the small group dialogues, mediation that is offered by Community Mediation Services, a nonprofit in St. Louis, to allow for mediation both between police officers and community members and among community members to try to resolve conflicts, and hopefully mean that there isn't a need for the police to be involved. The Civilian Review Board, and of course the NPSC itself are both other mechanisms created by the police department that are robust and active and working to incorporate community member feedback into how FPD polices. An obstacle with consent decree compliance has been staffing. Both not having enough sworn, being under the number of sworn officers that are the police department is supposed to be at, but then also not having some important staff in key positions, like having a permanent city manager, having a court administrator, a consent decree coordinator, a training coordinator. Really happy to report today. You asked for good news, and I think a real piece of good news is that FPD is on a much better trajectory for staffing. They're at 76%, which maybe sounds like it should be higher, but it's actually much better than it has been. And of course, no police department, no government agency is ever going to be at 100% staffing. But 76% is really a big improvement and reflects the active recruitment efforts of Chief Doyle and his staff. And then we do have skilled and committed personnel now in those key positions that I mentioned, particularly the training coordinator and the consent decree coordinator. So now that those positions are filled, we have seen compliance moving forward more quickly. Another accomplishment was that the court amnesty program was fully implemented. I know many of you are familiar with this. It was a program created by the consent decree. It was a remedy to deal with the harms I mentioned about the way the municipal court was operating. And the program required the city to go and for certain charges from before 2014 to assess which of those cases really needed to go forward. It was sort of a recognition of the problematic way that the court had been operating. And the city went through and analyzed the outstanding cases, found about 7,500 cases were eligible for consideration for being closed under some criteria that the consent decree process developed. And it took a long time, but the end result was that the vast majority of those cases were closed. The city decided not to prosecute them, which we feel was really the right outcome and in the interest of justice. And the monitor has found the city in compliance by fully implementing the CAP, the court amnesty program. It's a big accomplishment. Those of you, many of you do come to all our court hearings, maybe many others listen in. I know you've heard us, you're probably tired of hearing us talk about the need for progress on training. And that's because it doesn't matter if you've written the best policies in the world, if you don't have training on them, those policies are not going to be part of the MO for how officers operate with the public. So the next step after policies is to do in-service training, not just those roll calls where they say, here's the policy, but actual practical training with role plays and scenarios, the kinds of adult learning that actually helps people learn skills that they can then use in the field. And this has been a major an obstacle to the city's lack of progress in implementing in-service training. But we are happy to report that by filling that key position finally earlier this year, by hiring an able and committed training coordinator, those of you who are involved on the ground have just seen the progress, the difference it made from before that position was filled and after. It's been huge, and we're finally actually seeing in-service trainings getting delivered and in the pipeline. We counted up, I think, 7 different trainings in active stages of development right now, which was basically from 0 to maybe 1 before she came on board. So it's really a big accomplishment. Trying to think if there's anything else I should say about that. Okay. So one way to measure progress as well is, what has the monitor found about the city's compliance? This isn't a monitor who sort of just checks boxes. She's really looking at assessing whether the city is complying with the goals of the consent decree. And so here's just a snapshot of the audits that her team has done to date. There were court audits in 2018 and 19. Without getting too much into the weeds, she found that many of those provisions in the consent decree that covered the courts, the city was in either fully in compliance or on its way in partial compliance with.
Do you have this on hand now?
We don't have this on a handout, but we can talk to you afterwards about getting it if you're interested, okay? There was also a force audit last year, and the second one is underway right now. We had preliminary discussion with it about this with the city today. And, of course, the audits are a really important part of making sure that those policies are worth something, right? That it doesn't matter if you have a great policy and you're trained on it, if nobody's going back and checking and making sure that you're actually following the policy, then it's probably not going to be effective, certainly not as effective as it could be. And then next up will be the accountability audit is in the first stages. And next up, the monitor has announced that she'll be doing cameras and an audit of the municipal court. We didn't come here tonight to sort of be trying to paint a totally rosy picture of compliance. We wish things were farther along. I don't think anybody in city government who's involved in working on the consent decree would say anything different. I think we all wish that think that things should be farther here in 2024 than they are. And we're going to continue, as we have been, to work with the city, but also to push the city to make progress. And again, now that those positions are in place, the data systems are in place, to make faster progress as well, coming into compliance.
So one question we got was, how long do these decrees typically take? And it's really hard to put a ballpark on that, but we wanted to talk about how other decrees have been progressing. I want to start this with a big caveat, which is that every consent decree is unique. There's no off-the-shelf consent decree that is imposed on every city that DOJ in which we conduct an investigation. That's really important to understand. While it is true, as Nancy said, in many of our investigations, we do find discrimination. In many of our investigations, we find excessive force. As a result, many of our decrees have provisions that require reform of use of force or reform to prevent bias in policing. But there are other, and that was true in Ferguson. So if you look at the Ferguson consent decree, like the decree in Baltimore, or like the decree in New Orleans, there are provisions that pertain to use of force reform or bias-free policing. But it's also true that we made some unique findings in Ferguson. For example, as Nancy said, those findings pertaining to the municipal court. So as a result, Ferguson's decree is unique in that it has a whole section devoted to reform of the municipal court. So I wanted to give that caveat at the outset so that when you see these dates of other decrees wrapping up, you're able to put it in some context because every city is different. Every city's decree is different by nature of the investigation that led to it. But we did get questions. How are other cities doing? So we wanted to provide some of that information. These are some examples. The statute that I mentioned at the beginning of this investigation under which we work has been in place for 20 years. We've closed out decrees in Los Angeles, Prince George's County, and
DC, sorry.
DC, Washington, DC, that are not on this slide. But just by way of overview, you know, in December of 2017, the court granted our and East Haven's request to end a 2012 agreement. Took 5 years. In October 2023 and May 2024, the court granted ours and Albuquerque's request to end many parts of the 2014 agreement. So a little bit longer. In May 2024, a court granted ours and Newark's request to end parts of a 2016 decree. In November 2023, a court granted DOJ's and Portland's request to end many parts of its 2014 agreement. So as you can see, the decrees take some time to wrap up. In this respect, Ferguson is not unique. I also want to emphasize, as you can see on this slide, court granted, court granted, court granted. How did these decrees wrap up? The court has to decide. So DOJ and the city together approach the court and ask, and they present evidence, typically based on the kinds of assessments that Nancy described that the monitor is doing, present that evidence to the court and say, based on the jurisdiction's track record, we think you can terminate either part of the agreement or the entire agreement. So that is how other cities have been doing. But again, I can't stress enough. Every city's different. Every decree is different. But we know that many people have had this question. So we wanted to be upfront about what's going on in other parts of the country. How decrees can help? People have asked this question as well. So we are seeing some success with our consent decrees, remedying the problems we found in our investigations. For example, in Newark, which I said just asked the court together with DOJ to terminate some parts of the decree. 2 years after initial training, officers were over 95% compliant with the revised policies governing stops. That's based on the monitor's assessment. In Albuquerque, this gives you an idea of why parties are asking courts to terminate the agreements and why courts are granting these requests. In Albuquerque, force dropped 40% since 2020. In Seattle,
Let's say use of force
yes.
instead of force, manpower force.
Yes, exactly. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Butler. Absolutely. Use of force. In Seattle, the department reduced the use of serious force by 61%. In Portland, and in Portland, the investigation there was really focused on the use of force against people with serious mental illness. The last assessment by their compliance officer found that use of force against people with with mental illness was occurring in only 0.5% of police encounters, substantial drop. In New Orleans, where critical firearm discharges were a key issue, in 2017 and 2018, there were only 3 critical firearm discharges as compared with 18 in 2017 and 2018. So that gives you an idea of some of the changes that jurisdictions are seeing where they've been assessed and why courts are granting some of these requests to terminate. Don't believe us? Listen to the leaders of some of these departments and what they are saying about decrees. Detroit is another jurisdiction in which we had a decree, and the former chief there said the Detroit Police Department is a better police department as a result of the consent decree. The Seattle police superintendent said he has witnessed firsthand how the consent decree has transformed his department as well as citizens for the better of all of us. I have another quote from the former superintendent of New Orleans saying, from DC, saying that when he was chief of the DC Police Department, they would not have been able to make the changes they made without the decree. The end result was very positive. And I want to say that much of these sentiments have been echoed recently by Ferguson Police Chief Doyle, who told St. Louis Public Radio just in April, he said, at the end of the day, the decree is going to put us in a position where we are going to have the best policies and procedures. So that's a sentiment that even Chief Doyle has echoed right here in Ferguson. So I'm going to let Nancy talk a little bit about the path forward here in Ferguson.
So one question that we've been asked by community members is, how does this end? When will the time come that DOJ is no longer visiting, and what does that process look like? Well, the consent decree itself actually spells out the end process. And it says that these words are just taken right from the consent decree, that the city has to get to full and effective compliance and then maintain it for 2 years. And that was a question we got. What's the time frame for monitoring after completion? So that's set out in the consent decree. They have to get to compliance. They got to sustain it for 2 years. And no, go ahead. I'm worried I'm talking too fast, Ian. Are you okay? That's pretty standard. As Amy said, our agreements are different. There's some that might have a shorter period for certain parts of the consent decree based on what the findings were, and some are actually longer. They require compliance for 3 years. So it just depends. What the monitor is going to be looking at is, as I said, they're not just checking boxes, but one aspect of compliance is whether the city and FPD have checked some boxes. Have they implemented this policy? Have they delivered this training? Are these systems in place? But then the consent decree also requires the monitor to look at what they call outcome measures. How do you, if the goal here is constitutional policing, well, how do you measure that? And the monitor's role is to come up with sort of the metrics that she's going to be looking at to evaluate, have the outcomes required by the consent decree being reached by the city. And it's on the city, and the police department together, they're the ones who have the burden. It's on them to show that they're in compliance. And one thing we do on the DOJ team frequently in our conversations with the city is say, you know, we would encourage you on this paragraph, we think you've done it, go to take this to the monitor and ask for a compliance finding. Let's get that clock ticking, on being found in compliance for paragraphs, because no city is ever going to do everything all at once. It's going to happen piece by piece. But if you're in compliance, we want the city to get credit. And those are conversations that we will continue to be having with them. So what we're going to be looking for in the near term in our conversations with the city is we are going to be focused on expanding the police department's engagement with compliance. It can't all be on one person. When I talked earlier about the lack of people filled in key positions being a hindrance to the city coming into compliance, part of the problem is when there's a lot of turnover, if there aren't systems in place for preserving knowledge and the work that person's done, really sets the city back. And so we've been having conversations about, and we will continue to push this, having better systems in place for saving work, basically, memorializing what you're doing, providing the training and information that the next person in your role is going to need. So, the training committee doesn't need to spend a year saying, here's our understanding of where things were, because that information, wasn't preserved by the prior person doing the work. So, people, there has been high turnover in some of these roles, such as consent decree coordinator, but it's also inevitable. People leave jobs, and really everybody in one of these implementation roles should be planning for the possibility that they may not be in that role forever, that somebody might step into their shoes. We are highlighting that with the city. They need to plan for turnover and spread out the work among more people than just a few. As I mentioned earlier, training is really important to make those policies part of how officers interact every day in the community. And we have been pushing that with the court and with the city, and we've been pleased with the progress in the last few months with the new training coordinator. We're going to continue to be prioritizing our review of trainings and pushing her and the department to keep moving forward with delivering trainings, but then also having planning at the same time, planning for the next set of trainings that are going to come. You can't just do one thing at a time here, and she's not by any means. So another item that community members have told us loud and clear is that there's a real thirst for information here about where things are, how much longer is needed, where is the work needed, what have you done, what do you need to do? There needs to be better transparency by the city and where they are with consent decree implementation. We were having those conversations with the city in meetings today, and we'll continue to be pushing that. We do think there need to be better mechanisms for the city to be telling the public what they're doing and what they still have to do. And finally, those assessments, in order to be found in compliance, for those outcome measures, FPD needs to be assessed. And the monitor needs to be doing audits and showing where improvement is needing and getting compliance up to a level that the monitor considers to be substantial compliance. So we can start that clock. So we're going to be continuing to emphasize and focus on the need for the monitor to be doing assessments as she is, of course, and for the city to be cooperating and helping and also learning from the assessments so that the next time they do better and compliance gets higher. Anything you want to add before we open it?
I guess the only other thing I would add on the assessments, I'm not sure if you covered it, but building FPD's capacity to assess itself.
Yes.
So, the monitor does assessments. There are also requirements that FPD itself track and analyze its own data Because at the end of the day, what the decree wants is when DOJ leaves, FPD has by then become a self-reflective agency, and that all of the reforms that all of us have worked so hard, and all of you have worked so hard on embedding in FPD in the city, sustain for decades to come. So building that ability to assess itself is a really key component of this process.
Maybe take like 30 seconds and I'll just gather up any note cards so that we can then try to answer your question.
Well, we were gonna, oh, go ahead. Help me. But that's okay. It's a small part. Yeah, it's small enough for you that we can do this, but, so I'd like to thank both Nancy Glass
Glass of water.
okay, Nancy Glass and Amy Senior for coming and doing this again. Status hearing is tomorrow morning at 10. At 10, as the courthouse is available for anyone to participate. And actually, the city is sponsoring a bus where you can just go to the community center and hop on the bus, and it's 8:45 in the morning. And if anybody wants to go, they probably need to tell or sign up in the back now, because the city needs to know by 7:45 who's going. They have maybe spots for about 12 more people. Okay, while they're looking that over, I just want to ask some basic questions that came up. So, who can tell me what MPSC is? Because we use that acronym. MPSC. Police Steering Committee. Neighborhood Police Steering Committee. So I just want you to know, MPSC, Neighborhood Police Steering Committee, there are some members of that organization in this room, and it's open to anyone to participate. Basic charge is to help the city understand how the community wants to be policed. That's what we do. Our numbers are down, particularly since COVID, etc. So we'd like to invite you, if you're interested, to join MPSC. I want to let you know that the MPSC is mentioned in the consent decree. That was the Department of Justice commitment to have the community be part of the betterment of the city. So it's an important committee. We do things a lot by consensus because we want all voices to be heard. We try not to have a hierarchical way of operating, which disempowers people who aren't used to working in organizations. So you're welcome to join us. And so I also want to ask, what is a monitor? She mentioned 3 parties to the consent decree. 3 parties. Who are the 3 parties?
The city. DOJ. The court.
And the monitor.
And the monitor.
Okay, the 3 parties. DOJ, the city, and the monitor. So what's the function of a monitor?
Oversee and make sure things get done.
And he or she does that on behalf of who? The judge. That's what I was looking for. So the DOJ represents the people, the citizens, and actually what they're doing is representing our rights as the federal government, as we deal with state and local governments. So they're making sure that one area of the government does not infringe upon the rights of the citizens. So really DOJ is our advocate as it relates to governments, in this case, the city. The monitor works for the judge. She's the eyes and the ears for the judge. And therefore, there's questions about, well, the city's paying the monitor. The city is paying the monitor on behalf of the judge, so the judge knows what the city is doing or is not doing. And then the city is the city where we live. And the city is organized, hopefully, as a public service for the people who live in it. So I just wanted to review that quickly.
Question, Ms. Lyon.
Yes.
So I think she mentioned in the presentation, that one of their concerns is that the city has not been as transparent as they should be. So who says something to the city when they're not doing something they're supposed to do, like
That
transparency?
sounds like a question. Sounds like a question. Did you write that down?
I'm so sorry, I was reading a written question, sorry.
No,
Well, I didn't think of the question until she said what she said,
Yeah.
and you all did your presentation. And that's why I didn't fill one out. I knew I would have questions
Yeah,
after I listened.
okay.
So my
We can
question is, did you hear it? Or
No,
did I-
That's why I'm asking.
Okay, during the presentation, I think it was you who said that one of you all's concerns is that the city has not been as transparent as they should be. So who holds the city accountable to be transparent? Is it you? Is it the monitor? Is it the judge?
I'm gonna walk on the other side of this so Zoom can see me and I'm not just looking at the podium, and I can take a crack at that. All right. I would say all three, you know, the monitor for the court, it has a role in making sure that the city does what it needs to do, and DOJ has a job and a role too to hold the city's feet to the fire and make sure that we're asking for relief from the court if there's an issue or a disagreement. And, you know, to date, our approach has been to try to work cooperatively with the city when there's disagreements. The main one being, you know, things should be moving faster than they are. And so far, we have found that to be effective enough to move things forward. You know, if we need to file for relief from the court, we can and will, but we think it's better, more efficient, cheaper for the city, faster for coming into compliance if we can work things out cooperatively. So when we tell you, you know, these are the things we're focusing on, we think the city should do this, we're committing to you all that it's our job too, to make sure the city does these things.
Okay, I will give you one quick example of why I asked that. We had a city meeting, and I don't think it was this year. It may have been a year ago. And one of the MPSC members gave comments, and it was regarding the consent decree and what the city should be doing, because MPSC, like Cassandra just said, is in the consent decree. Well, one of the council members said to that MPSC person, stay in your lane, which many of us felt was absolutely unacceptable and disrespectful. So that's why I asked you that question, because when they do things like that, which is clearly disrespectful against citizens who are working to make things better and to get this consent decree complete, I was just wondering who holds them accountable, because that was totally unacceptable and disrespectful.
Yeah, and if I make sure I'm understanding correctly, it was the city council member said, stay in your lane. I see. And I'm really sorry that happened. You know, we really value the volunteer service that community members do and have done for years before we were here and since we've been here. And as I said, in the policy process in particular, and that input has improved significantly the end result with the work. It's not just a box checked, oh, you asked the community members. No, the community member input is based on knowledge of the needs of what the police should be doing in Ferguson. And so having that input is really crucial. So I'm sorry to hear that that was how the input was taken.
Yeah. We got a number of questions, and I'm grouping them together because, they're on the same theme, which is, you know, after DOJ leaves, you know, how can people ensure that the consent decree is still complied with? And I think that and similarly, what is the mechanism by which people can ensure that the decree is still complied with? So it's one of the reasons, it is of the utmost importance to us that the remedies in the decree are durable, that they sustain, that they outlive the decree. And that's why there's a period of monitoring for 2 years after the city comes into compliance, so that it's not enough to say, oh, we got in, we're compliant, and now we're leaving. That everyone, DOJ and the monitor and the court are sticking around for 2 years to make sure that those remedies are durable and endure for at least a 2-year period. Now, the other mechanism there are a variety of mechanisms that the decree sets up to help with that durability. Things like the Civilian Review Board, a community policing and engagement plan and policy and ethos, the neighborhood policing steering committee. Those structures that are set up to ensure that after DOJ leaves, after the court terminates the decree, mechanisms remain in place for people to raise issues with the city, raise issues with the department, and course correct when necessary. We can't be here forever, but the decree has tried to set up mechanisms to ensure that if there is backsliding, people have a means by which they can make their voices heard. Do you have anything to add?
Nope. Guess we can just tag team here,
Yeah,
maybe?
yeah.
Okay, so a question from Zoom was that the process doesn't seem to have a mechanism for incorporating community feedback. What avenue do citizens have to express concerns or offer feedback? Well, one way is through the policy creation and then review process. All the policies are offered out for community feedback. Community members can participate in that just as individuals or as members of groups such as the NPSC. There's also a mechanism on the FPD's website. They've said they're open to taking feedback at any time on policies if people have that. So just the fact that the policy was made and was made final doesn't mean that you can't also comment on it. Another mechanism, as our organizers have described, would be through the Neighborhood Police Steering Committee. That is sort of a vehicle that the consent decree created for community members to be able to have input into the process of reform. What other ones am I missing?
There's the Civilian Review Board, which, you know, we can't say enough about the hard work that everyone in the CRB and everyone who created the CRB put into that process. So if individuals have complaints, they can file directly with CRB. There's also, you know, the monitor has a website where she takes feedback. We're always available for as long as we're here. So we've tried to create multiple channels. The court, you know, tomorrow the court is taking feedback from members of the public from the podium, so people can speak in court tomorrow. When she doesn't do that, she always accepts written comments before the hearings, which many people in this room have availed themselves of. And I can assure you that everyone who receives that feedback takes it very, very seriously.
Can I take the next one?
I don't have any, I got a number of, specific issues that I think are directed at
Chief
FPD
Doyle
about
made a comment
particular,
on chat.
public safety successes and challenges that I will share, if it's okay, directly with FPD so that, FPD can respond directly.
I have some more questions on that too.
I think yours I tried to address as, because we got other questions along that line about like.
But it's much specific stuff on there that, it's about two of them that you might answer, but there's one more on that too.
What law enforcement entity or entities will hold Ferguson accountable, that would be, you know, the NPSC, the CRB, all of those mechanisms that the decree has set up.
Okay, so when it comes to that consent decree, and the CRB and those different organizations, when it comes to a timely and efficient situation, I mean, how long what is the time period for them to respond? Because, you know, they're gonna have, once you file your complaint, this is a process, it's a timely process. So what is the duration of time, limit to where your issue can be reviewed and resolved, not just reviewed and put out there and time goes by, years go by before it becomes a resolution to that situation? I mean, what is put in place for that? Not just to look at it, but to actually resolve it.
That's a great question in this.
And does it have to go to the court, or does it go to the city, or does it go to the police department? Where does it go? And when the city doesn't do their job?
So, go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say, I mean, I think, that's part of what the monitor's role is to look at the things that are required. So here's a process when a complaint comes in. Here's what the policy says. Here's what you were trained in. Now, the monitor, when that's ready for auditing, will come in and take a look at the paperwork on the complaints and see if policy has been followed, and then write a report and tell the city you're in compliance or you're not in compliance because we found, you know, just to take the example that you gave, we found there's a problem with complaints not being resolved in time. So.
Now, when I'm talking about situation, I'm talking about after you're gone.
Oh.
Now, when you have access to a DOJ, I'm saying when you all are leaving the jurisdiction, like leave the power in the hands of civilian review board, which is the eyes and the ears of our community, you know, and it's not the court itself.
Right. So I don't have the, I know that there are timelines set out for CRD resolution of the complaints in their policies, and I don't have the time frame at the top of my head right now. I know that their policies are on FPD's website, and they should specify the time frame. So sorry that I don't have that immediately on my brain right now, but those timelines are on the website for the city of Ferguson has CRD policies on its website.
And how many of those complaints have to be sent in before it becomes a lawsuit? Say, for instance, I mean, I know there are like degrees of complaints, but when it comes to the city not being in compliance over a spectrum of different things, you know, that's one thing I was talking about, when there's like when there are various groups of categories that they have to comply with, and it's not done, you know, how many of those categories that you are talking about have to be, not be in compliance before it becomes, okay, you all need to be involved as far as the courts, DOJ, and not just the city, you know? How many of those have to not be in compliance before the DOJ have to be involved again?
Well, you know, I can't say when we would, you know, when we would come back to Ferguson, if we would, because that's when we open an investigation is highly fact dependent. And I think we're just not there yet. I think what we're trying to do right now is focus on, we've got a ways to go. We're gonna be here for a while. What we're really trying to do right now is focus on getting these systems up and running compliant with a period of 2 years where we can see them functioning and then take it from there.
Yeah, I'm saying this because it's one thing to look forward, but to make sure that you can, you know, be reassured of a resource, so when that pathway is hit and those 2 years gone, and then the city say, you know what, I'm sitting pretty right now, I don't have to worry about you all reporting me, or I don't have to be worried about being accountable because they're gone, but we're gonna do this the way we wanna do it now.
So, like I said, to be able to hear the answer before they get to that position, that's what I'm looking for, to say, okay, so once the CRB have total power, you know, and whatever, the neighborhood police steering committee have a total power to be able to be our eyes and ears, I want to know, you know, what do we do from there if those people are not in time compliance?
Well, what we're focused on right now is really trying to ensure that those systems are robust, that there's broad ownership for those systems within city government, within FPD, within the community at large, so that we don't find ourselves back here. I can't tell you if and when we will find ourselves back here. I can't answer that to you. But I think we really want to focus on getting them compliant.
I think when the judge says it's over, and for us to start it again, we have to start it again from making a complaint.
And part of my
Right,
question was,
so-
would people have to pay for that? To, you know, like I said, what you're talking about right now, so would people have to pay for that to be started up individually? Or would some organization have to stand up
We didn't
for it,
pay for it,
like you all?
Yes, they did, like taxes, what year was they pay for?
I didn't mean that.
I wonder,
And then,
Please do.
okay, so, meaning activity happened, DOJ was on the ground, reports were written by arch city defenders and stuff. And that prompted their investigation, and once they did their investigation, was it 108 pages
something like
in
that.
your original investigation? Then they started negotiating with the city. And the city voluntarily entered the consent decree. And once that happened, it was in the judge's hand. When it's over, is when the judge says it's over. Not before. And once it's over, it's over. And then for us to say, well, but, we're starting from scratch again. Correct?
I think I agree with that. Go ahead.
What I wanted to say, you all haven't talked about it. How many of those cities are charter? Because Ferguson is run by charter. The council runs the city. So how many of those cities are that you all don't comply and made and all this stuff? Because whatever the council say is what goes. So how many of the people that came out of the consent decree are charter cities?
That is a great question.
I have that data.
I set that up and asked you all, but you all.
No, we just haven't got to it. It was up there. Sorry, we just hadn't got to it, but, so to take that one now, the question is how many of these cities where you've had consent decrees have charters? I don't know. It's a really good question, and I'm sorry. I just don't know.
State.
Yeah.
So there's 50 different states, and each state handles how cities are formulated.
Portland has a city council. That's all I know.
So
They don't have one?
They do, Portland does.
They do?
That's the only one I know off the top of my head.
Okay, I mean, because the council runs Ferguson, so we need to deal with the reality that, the council goes to the police or whatever else. It's done here in Ferguson. It's run by them. So I was wondering, you know, everybody worried about getting out the consent decree, but the council is the problem. So, you know,
It's a really good question. I mean, basically you're saying you have to take the reality on the ground about how decisions get made. And I will say, you know, the city charter form of government is not unusual. And I know I can't give you an informed answer off the top of my head about which of these cities had city charters, but it's definitely something we deal with, you know, and others, I'll just go out on a limb and say that I think I would imagine some of these cities that have come into compliance have done it even despite having a charter form of government. So I don't think that should be, that should prevent, them from coming into compliance. But I know I know Chief Doyle had a comment on the Zoom, and I'd love for him to be able to hear that, if that's okay.
I'll read it if that's all right, folks. So again, this is Chief Doyle, who wrote this in chat. Chief Doyle. I believe we have made tremendous progress over the past year. Staffing is up, use of force is down, training coordinator in place, community engagement is up, and morale is up. We have rebranded the police department as far as new badges, uniforms, shoulder patches, and police vehicles. In 2014, Ferguson Police Department had about 3 African-American police officers. Now we have around 50% of African-American representation on the police department. Further, we have a staff that consists of 23% female police officers. I continue to hear from our residents who are happy about the progress. While we still have our challenges, we are on the pathway of moving forward. I thank the DOJ, the community, and proud for this meeting. Together, Ferguson, we can do this. Chief Doyle.
Thank you, Chief Doyle. Yeah. We appreciate your leadership and your the important message that you've had for FPD about the need for focus and in the police department and coming into compliance.
I just want to interject, with the Department of Justice, what comes into play is the United States Constitution. And so they came into Ferguson because they felt Ferguson was violating citizens' constitutional rights. So that's the law that the Department of Justice really works with, is the US Constitution, not the state laws. And Ferguson, whatever, however we're organized, they still have to abide by the United States Constitution. And so the Department of Justice faulted us on doing unconstitutional policing.
Thanks for that distinction. It's helpful. Okay, we got a couple more here. Somebody asked a question about how turnover has affected, I think this word says progress of the consent decree. And I think hopefully we've covered that and answered it. Okay, if not, feel free to ask a follow-up. And then there was a question about, since the events, well, I'll just read it. It's an interesting question. Okay, since the events of August 2014 here in Ferguson, what launched us into the public eye, many other situations across the country, such as George Floyd's murder, have shifted the focus. How have these situations been analyzed in the areas of consent decrees for those areas, or a change in Ferguson's process? It's interesting questions that are taking into account. There's been a lot of important history that's happened since 2014 in the United States with Black Lives Matter, and understand the conversation about constitutional policing. So I would say, and Amy, feel free to jump in. I would say that change or those developments have not really affected anything in Ferguson's process. The agreement is what it is. And I think those developments just show us, to our minds at least, how relevant and important the consent decree is. The theory behind our work is that if you do these things, then you're engaged in constitutional policing, you're engaged in community policing, and then you don't have these problems. Or when isolated incidents happen, you have strong mechanisms and systems for developing them. So while those later events, I think, show us how relevant our work is, they haven't changed anything really about what needs to be done in Ferguson. Okay, and then as for situations in other areas, our office did open an investigation in Minneapolis. It was a pattern of practice investigation of the police department based not on any one event, but similar to Ferguson, on whether there was a pattern of unconstitutional policing. We issued findings that there was a pattern, and those are online if you're interested. And we are engaged in a process of negotiating a consent decree with Minneapolis now. I don't know if I've answered the question. If I haven't, feel free to ask a follow-up. Okay. And then a question from Zoom: was Newark the only city that successfully ended their consent decree? Okay, so one sort of important distinction: Newark has not ended their consent decree. Some of the examples that we listed in that on that slide were recent city: Albuquerque, Newark and Portland have recently entered into, with the DOJ, they asked the court to please terminate parts of their consent decree. Sort of an acknowledgement of we can't do everything all at once. So we've done this section, we've sustained compliance. We can actually, you can give us credit for that and end that section. Then we can move to the sections that still need to be done. So those cities, that's a great progress. It's really important milestone, but those agreements are not, Newark, including, is not finished yet.
But Detroit is, Los Angeles is.
East Haven.
is, Warren, Ohio is. So there are jurisdictions where consent decrees have entered, including small jurisdictions like East Haven, Connecticut, and Warren, Ohio.
And then there was a question, another interesting question about, in the stats that we read about use of force, was there also a reduction, was there a reduction or increase in crime? And I will tell you about a conversation Amy and I had as we were putting together this presentation. And there, in one of our, sometimes we do cite statistics saying over this time period, force went down and crime went down. And Amy has had the sage advice, which was not to emphasize that, which I think is correct, because there are so many different factors that cause crime to raise or lower. And we haven't, I don't know how we would, we have never set out to try to isolate a consent decree as a factor among all of those and its role in affecting crime rates. So I think to try to actually answer the question over these, there have been reductions in crime in some areas over the course of the consent decree, but there's also been reduction of crime, nationwide and over the same time period. So I don't know that we can take credit for it. Just like I don't know that we should be blamed if there is a rise in crime. I think that that's probably, the crime stats are not the most useful metric in figuring in those outcome measures for whether a department is engaged in constitutional policing. I think we've gone through all of the questions. If there are more, if you all have follow-up or additional, I don't know if, I actually have no idea what time it is or if we have extra. Okay, I'll turn to organizers. If you want to just have us be available to take questions one-on-one, or if you want to take more questions. I don't have a good sense of how much time you
It's
all.
20 after.
It's 7:19.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, let's do a couple of things. First, I just want to remind people who may want to go to the status hearing tomorrow that you need to call the Park and Rec if you want to just ride the bus. And that Park and Rec number is right here. It is, the column. 314-521-4661. 521-4661.
I don't think there will be that much time to call
Yeah,
after the park's open, so I would just say, as long as you're there, make sure you're there by 8:45.
I talked to the party
Okay,
person.
but just be sure to be at community center before 8:45, and there should be room for everyone.
Yeah, that's the unofficial answer.
Yeah.
I was there. Also, I also just wanted to mention, particularly anybody who's interested in participating on the Neighborhood Police Steering Committee, that we're meeting every third Thursday of the month, and for the next 3 months, we're beginning to work on this community engagement plan.
Make it plain, there's a facility team and then there's the big overall. So make it plain, it's facilities.
No,
Yes, we're not.
well, can I finish what I was saying? Okay.
Don't leave it out.
So the Neighborhood Police Steering Committee for the next 3 meetings, so July, August, and September, will be working on our community engagement plan. And that is a consent decree designated tasks. And I want to introduce Patricia Washington to this group because she is a public information officer and she has, I don't want to say volunteered, but she knows that she's the person that we need to help us guide that process. And she's very capable in that role. So is there anything you want to mention?
No, thank you all for coming. I'm happy to see you and I'm excited to continue to sleep and get the work done. It's great, thank you.
Another key staffer who has been added to the roster of FPD in the city and is working very, very hard on this.
Yes, she is.
Again, mention the two organizations, one, but we have a big group.
Go ahead, you mentioned. Go ahead.
Okay, there's a facility team that makes the decision and gets stuff together from the big group. And she said, working on this community engagement, we need people that's gonna come off the street and help us get this together. I mean, my tongue is getting tired. Team is really small right now. I don't know, because, well, I want to be honest with you. People are tired. Some they're tired, I'm tired. But I'm coming back to help out where I need it. But we need people, citizens that love Ferguson. Because we're not here to put it down, we're here to bring it forward. We're here to make it stronger. So we need people. And like she was saying, there's a big group, then there's a smaller group that's gets the agenda, makes the appointment with the different ladies, like the one back here. My first time meeting, you better put it together. And all the key players that needs to be introduced to the citizens. So it's two of us. It's the facilitating team and it's the big NSAPCP group. So it's two groups. I mean, we overlap. So we got Proud here and we got NPS. So we're overlapping with each other.
Okay.
So. Thank you. Okay.
Tanya, could you repeat the location and time of the NPSC meeting, please?
Okay, actually, that's a good point. So it's the third
No,
Thursday of the month.
the big one.
Yes.
And then fourth Thursday is our.
At City Hall?
No,
It's here.
It's here.
It's here 6 to 8 every third Thursday for the rest of the year. We have reserved this spot.
facilitated at the lobby. That's the fourth Thursday.
And what the facilitation team does, which she's already said, is we don't have officers, presidents, and things like that. So we have people who are interested in guiding the community, the MPSC. They get together and determine the agenda for the next meeting. So the agenda has so it's a smaller group that determines the agenda for the larger group.
Can you give us the address of this area that we're in right now, in this building that we're in right now, so people don't know?
So what's the address?
9420.
9420. You got that? 9420 West Fourth.
Avenue in Ferguson, Missouri.
We had another question that was put on Zoom. And it says, how much engagement is seen from the community as a whole? Typically, the people who complain the loudest are the least informed.
You said that wrong.
That sounds more like a commentary.
Don't answer
So how about the first half of it?
Just to say that, to repeat yet again, the feedback that we have received from members of the community has been well taken, has in many ways made certainly the policies better, has made the policy, has made the whole process more informed, and we continue to welcome it. We're happy to be here tonight, happy to come back. Hope to see you and hear you tomorrow.
I got a question. So is there like a real-time space on the website, Ferguson website, where people can not just send an email? Some people might not want to email, but is there like a real-time comment space on the Ferguson website where it's real-time, not just something that's posted up every now and then?
No.
No.
It's not, okay, and I think that would be something that would be huge to sort of get able to assess other people's comments outside of coming to this type of town hall or forum or whatever, it might not have time or space. Zoom is a great avenue to be able to reach people from everywhere.
Yeah.
But if there was like some type of real-time space on the consent decree page to be able to give your comment and it be, you know, like a constant thing, you know, real-time thing, not just a, okay, email where somebody can't see or can't hear what people are thinking. It can be an overall consensus as a whole, and then people can assess themselves as a community, not just the city being able to, you know, put together assessments or, you know, all kind of newsletters or whatever else. The city can, you know, look at it and see, hey, we as a city is coming together, not just the city coming together, but the citizens are coming together as a city.
Yeah, I don't, like people are saying, that doesn't exist on the city's website right now. But I, you know, in court, when people stand up and they speak in court, that's real time, that's public, everyone can hear it, people can call into Zoom and hear it in real time.
You know, some people can't make it,
Right.
you know, and so like I said, while you all are doing it, I mean, it's a suggestion that could possibly be done, even though it's not done right now. If you can, I mean, but you can make it. So,
Money.
so if you.
Money.
Well, money plays a part, but you got all the different departments, you got Chris Pringle, other people that can actually create that, what he's already doing, that's part of his job. To update the website, update the information dealing with the consent decree, to where you can have a constant, real-time community comment section on their website. And it can be done, because it's already been put in that place to do that. So.
Okay. Mr. Shropshire had a question before we close. Go ahead.
Is there any movement on getting the courts, seeing the courts as next, they're pretty close to meeting all their qualifications? You know, you got the safety and the courts in the same consent decree. Is there any movement to get them into their final stages of their requirements?
Yeah, thanks for that. You know, because we have long said that was one of the first areas of the decree to make the most movement soonest. And like Nancy mentioned, there have been monitor assessments in 2018, 2019, finding that many of those provisions are far along. So we have started conversations with the city to see if they can start a self-assessment and to start to use it. As Nancy said, you know, we are very motivated as well to see findings of full and effective compliance where they exist. So that is something that we are keenly interested in, and we are working with the city to try and make that happen.
Yeah, it's more for the people of the city, but, you know, that's to piggyback onto, her, the website, isn't there supposed to be a dashboard that tells us where we're at in all of these things? I mean, I look at I'm not computer savvy, but I'm not computer illiterate. So, you know, my first source of information should be my city's website. And it is the most ineffective website I've seen in a long time. And I think on the first page, like this meeting, I only found out about it because of Facebook. And I have been, the only reason why I joined Facebook was to find out what was going on in my city. And I don't like Facebook. So it was a, you know, real decision for me to do that. But this is an important meeting, and I found out just by happenstance. So this is the lack of communication coming out of the city, I think, is our biggest hurdle.
Yeah, no
So-
disagreement here.
Yeah.
There's nothing anybody in this room can maybe do about it, but I wanted it to be said, so.
Thank you for your observation, your experience.
Yeah, you know, today.
Just to, while we're on this topic, so I forgot to announce this at the very beginning, but we have been recording this through the Zoom. So if anyone has made a comment that you do not want to be public, let us know. We can get the software to edit certain comments out and make sure that, you know, everybody's happy with it, because we do hope to put it onto our website, onto Proud's website, so that it is available for others to hear after this is over. So let me know if there's any concerns.
It's nice.
Yeah, but then the other thing is, we do hope to have, we should have a link on Proud's website so you can access this. And
That's nice of you. You go over there. Do you have a question or comment? You good?
Yep. I'm great.
Okay.
I'm great. Would you want us to elaborate on the dashboard that's being set up in the training? You know, because I'm quite sure she doesn't know about that Chris is trying to set a dashboard up to patch in.
Yeah, thanks for that, Mr. Sharper. I don't want to be flip that, you know, no disagreement here. But to give credit, the city is trying.
Yeah, I know.
I am also not
I've heard it
computer
for the last-
savvy. Also not computer savvy. There's also something to do with Microsoft 360 or 365 that I don't understand. You know, but it is something that we have been pressing for, because we have heard, we agree with the community. And if there's a technical glitch getting the dashboard up and running, fair and fine. In the meantime, is there some sort of like old school?
Like Excel? Spreadsheet? You know, maybe you start that word.
Format, but like, it doesn't have to be fancy right now,
Yeah.
as long as it's something as a stopgap to satisfy this very valid demand for answers. Yes, we are.
There is a progress at a glance. But you have to really go deep into it, and it's the monitors.
Yes.
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 Yeah, it's hard to find.
Having dug.
Well, we'll stick around for a few minutes after in case people want to talk to us separately as well.
Thank you for organizing.
Thanks to everyone on Zoom as well. We really appreciate you joining tonight.
Thanks, everybody.